Hi, good morning. I'm Liz Holdsworth, a lead for multimedia and online learning here at the Georgia Tech Library, and it is a real pleasure to introduce the next panel. So first, we have Dr. Eric Sembrat, who leads software development at Georgia Tech Center for the 21st Century Universities. His team is charged with strategy, design, and development of educational technology software innovations. Their work partners with internal and external collaborators, such as the Digital Credentials Consortium. Eric co-leads Georgia Tech's Educational Technology Steering Committee. Eric is a board member of the High Web and WUP campus. Next, we have Dr. David Joyner, who is the Executive Director of the Online Education and OMSCS in Georgia Tech's College of Computing. His research focuses on online education and learning at scale, especially as they intersect with for-credit offerings at the graduate and undergraduate levels. His emphasis is on designing learning experiences that leverage the opportunities of online learning to compensate for the loss of synchronous co-located class time. This includes leveraging artificial intelligence for student support and assignment evaluation, facilitating student communities in large online classes, and investigating strategies for maintainable and interactive presentation of online instructional material. Next, we have Dr. Mark Riedl, who is a professor in the Georgia Tech School of Interactive Computing and Associate Director of Georgia Tech Machine Learning Center. Dr. Riedl's research focuses on human-centered artificial intelligence, the development of artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies that understand and interact with human users in more natural ways. Dr. Riedl's recent work has focused on the story understanding and generation, computational creativity, explainable AI, and teaching virtual agents to behave safely. Next, we have Dr. Kartik Goyal, who is assistant professor in the School of Interactive Computing at the Georgia Tech starting this fall in 2023. His research interests are natural language processing and machine learning problems that involve developing probabilistic models of latent structure in naturally occurring data with capabilities of interpretability and control. His recent work has focused on problems in digital humanities, like computationally understanding the early modern English print culture. This session will be moderated by Samuel Graham, who serves as the library's college administrative officer. He is responsible for all administrative functions supporting the library, including facilities and logistics, finance, and technology. He believes strongly in doing what is right and making a positive impact. All right, take it away, Sam.
All right, thank you, Liz. Appreciate that. I think we have a great panel, and I think we're going to have a great conversation around AI and libraries and the future in higher education. So we have a lot of content to go through today. I have a lot of questions, which I think is a great kind of sounding board to kind of get these ideas and thoughts out. But first, I wanted to kind of share just a quick, thought. And one of the things is we all know libraries have evolved. They've kind of been built to evolve over time. So when you think about like innovations like clay tablets and papyrus and palm leaf scrolls, all the way up to like digital material and digital recordings and digital assets that are collected. Um, One of the things that I think we have thought about for some time, and you can think about cart catalogs to help you find material, and online versions and print serials and all these different things and technologies. But my first question, and this one will go to Mark and Kartik, and I want you to think about, what do you think, or how relevant do you think AI technologies in the context of libraries will be now for libraries and in the future?
Kartik, looks like you want to say something. You want to say something first?
No, Mark, you should go ahead first.
All right. When I think about libraries, libraries are places of sources of truth, right? Among other things, they've also become resources for places to find kind of the tools to become creators, right? So I think about the way libraries have shifted to, providing tablets, providing computational resources, providing software, providing tools, providing spaces to do creation, and teamwork and things like that. So in some sense, artificial intelligence will become one of the many tools that libraries should be providing to people. I think as some of these large language models become retrieval models that kind of start to take the place of more sophisticated Google searches and Bing searches and things like that, I think artificial intelligence will play a role in what libraries do. I think there's an interesting question as to whether libraries have specialized artificial intelligences or just conduits for existing artificial intelligence systems. But on the topic of kind of being the holders of truth, right? We're also seeing large language models as having very serious problems, at least right now, with providing reliable information. And so libraries may, in some ways, become things that push back against some of the kind of the free range AI systems that are out there to vet what AI systems are producing, or to be places where we can find resources that we can fact check our AI systems. So I think there's this kind of bifurcation of where kind of the future of libraries can go.
And thank you, Mark. You said a lot with that, but that the being a bastion of truth is definitely a cornerstone of where I think libraries play a very important role, or have the ability to play an important role. Kartik?
Yeah, I would echo very similar sentiments as Mark. But yeah, like regarding the questions about the past and the future, libraries are one place where information is curated in a very structured manner. In libraries, you do not only get the content, but you also get who produced the content, and ideally under what conditions was the content produced. That's in stark contrast to many of to large language models, for example, which train on a lot of data, but when they produce text, or when they refer you, or when they provide suggestions, they don't really attribute their produced text or suggestions to authors or to people behind the production of the knowledge. But AI in general, I feel, would like going beyond large language models. AI in general is useful for processing all of the informations that libraries currently have. For example, library technologies have been changing rapidly over the years. We went from collecting, their roles changed from being collectors to curators to developing catalogs so that people can find information easily. And I feel AI would just be another tool in the toolkit of library technologies, which would allow people to search for things and to get suggestions about what to look for, where to look for, given the topics, given the topic of interest, or given given what a scholar is searching for. And all of these tools, I think AI can reason over large volumes of text and large collections of library, ideally to be a better retrieval, to be a better search engine, or to be a better retrieval friend to help scholars identify and expand upon the sources that they might be interested in studying more. And yeah, and regarding future, that's an excellent question. So as you said, we've had tablets and books and books in various formats, but but future media also includes, or we already have movies and recordings and things like that. But I feel we are also seeing a shift, gradual shift toward knowledge production with augmented reality and virtual reality. So while I don't have an educated guess about how libraries should evolve to incorporate these mechanisms of knowledge production, I feel these modalities definitely will have a role in the future.
Yeah. Kartik, thank you. That, a lot of folks have talked about like the future of content, the future of material and mediums, and libraries have been there along the way to support those formats and those different mediums as well. Is it so absolutely, I'm with you in that thought process. Now here's Mark, and I'm gonna kind of toss this question to you. A lot of people talk about AI, right? There's a lot of, I say, hype, buzz. I kind of go across many different domains around AI, but specifically kind of talking about generative AI. Can you explain that in a way that everyone can truly understand what it is and what we should expect from generative AI?
No.
Love it.
Here's what I think we could say very quickly. Right. Well, specifically, we'll focus on these large language models, as they're called, like GPT, ChatGPT, are example of these. These are, GPT stands for something, is generative pre-trained transformer. There's three parts to that. Generative means generate text. Pre-trained means they are trained on large amounts of internet and book material. So they kind of have seen examples of almost anything that we might want to talk about. So they're very general purpose and can do lots of things. And transformer is just some details about how they're actually built. But I think the thing to remember when we're talking about these things is that what a language model fundamentally does is it correlates text to other text. So if you think about, a word like funeral, think about reading a book and there's a funeral scene in it, right? Statistically, you're going to see other words on that page, like lots of funeral scenes seem to happen in the rain, in the dark, and gloom, and crying, and people wearing dark clothes, right? So you can basically say anytime you see a funeral in a book, you're probably going to see these other words as well. So what a large language model does is just kind of ramps this up to 11 and says, anytime you see any amount of text, there's some probability of the next word, and the next word, and the next word, and the next word. So large language models are autocomplete, but they're very, very sophisticated autocomplete, meaning that they can look at a lot of text, not just like the last 2 or 3 words, but the last 100, 1,000 words. And if you think about 1,000 words, there's a lot of clues as to what needs to come next. Now, this is very powerful because we think in words, or we convey our thoughts through words. So when we ask these large language models to produce text, to respond to a prompt, which is just giving it an example of text, the clues about what it should say, it's going to come back writing things that look like they could have been human written, look a lot like human thought. That doesn't necessarily mean they're thinking about the words in the same way we think about words. When I'm talking right now, I'm kind of putting together a little plan about what I need to say next and kind of working towards that. Large language models are really more looking at the past and saying, based on everything I've seen in the past, here's the next word. They're not really thinking too far into the future. The fact that they don't look too far in the future is where they kind of get confused and do these things called hallucinations, where they say, there's a very probable word that I can say right here. It's just very, very likely. It's like talking about funerals and crying. I just need to talk about crying here. But if that particular word doesn't fit the facts of the world, right, then there's nothing that requires the large language model or GPT or anything like that to remain consistent with the truth of the world. So talk about news, it doesn't have to talk about current events. It doesn't have to remain truthful to these sorts of things. That makes these large language models very good for content creation, especially when there's a creative aspect. but they are not as reliable when it comes to talking about things that we would all kind of agree on as being facts or truth. Sometimes they'll get it right, but sometimes they'll get it wrong. So if you're talking about using this for scholarship, for learning about something, you want to be able to verify this. And going back to libraries, right, you want to basically verify this against other sources of knowledge. But if you're doing this for pure creation, go for it. I mean, this is going to be a great and powerful tool.
Thank you. And you did a great job explaining that, by the way. Next question. You mentioned natural language processing, Mark. So Kartik, I'm gonna shoot this question to you around natural language processing, but I want to add a little bit to it because I know you've done a lot of research and you've actually published a recent paper, I think in June, that I would love for you to maybe share the detail around what you've concluded and what you've done within that work.
Which paper are you talking about? The paper about
your ancient text paper in the comparison of character recognition into like origin of creation.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. Not origin of creation, but yes. Yeah. So my research is on natural language processing, but this paper, there's a series of works on this paper related to this paper, which has been in collaboration with we started this collaboration when I was a graduate student at CMU with people in English department at CMU and CMU libraries and statisticians and ML researchers at CMU. So the overall goal of this project was something that I alluded to earlier, that in early modern period, that is around 1640s to 1700s, a lot of the books that were printed out of fear of censorship, the publishers, or rather the printers, would not associate their names with those books. And recent bibliographic studies have shown that we might be missing out on more than half of the on the identities of more than half of the printers in these books. So the goal of this project has been to kind of visually analyze these anonymously printed books and identify and also anonymize at a large scale all of the books that were printed in this period. And from the books whose printers we know, kind of find out fingerprints, visual fingerprints for each of these printers. So, for example, a print shop uses historical printing was very mechanical, so we can reason about the mechanical processes that went about in printing these documents statistically, and for example, one of the basic kinds of fingerprints we are looking for are these distinctive types. So a print shop, while printing, might be using the same G over and over again for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and over time, that G might be dropped, or it might be rough handled, and it might end up developing certain imperfections. So for example, it might develop a notch on its lower bend. And that would be unique to all of the works that this printer would print from now on every time they use that particular G. So so this fingerprint is basically, if we can find an anonymously printed works, this particular G, then we have some evidence that that printer A, whose G was damaged in this particular way, was involved in printing the book. But this problem is like finding a needle in a haystack. And before computational approaches, manual bibliographers our bibliographers have approached this problem manually, where Charlton Hinman built a collator to analyze Shakespeare's first folio in depth, all of the characters and nearly all of the characters in the first folio, and then the field of analytic bibliography kind of painstakingly acquires copies from libraries, takes pictures of each character, or use magnifying glasses and record the pictures of each of the characters, and just remember in their head to match all the damages against all the other damages that they might have seen. But this project has shifted the focus to kind of take away the pain from this analysis and let the machines handle this processing of characters at a large scale. So following this goal, we have been developing techniques, because even for machines, this problem is kind of difficult, because we are talking about extremely rare events among like a lot of well-formed Gs or well-formed characters that you see in printed text. But yes, like this collaboration has yielded a lot of new knowledge. We now have a better idea about printers of works like Shakespeare's Fourth Folio and Areopagitica and Leviathan, and we are kind of asking bigger questions about the printing culture in the early modern period, following our development of computational tools that can analyze these books visually at scale. So this is the role AI has kind of played in computational bibliography, which is to understand, or which is to find out more about the printing culture that has remained hidden from us for so long.
Yeah, like finding a needle in a haystack. Like figuring that out has to be incredibly difficult. So to use AI in more processing versus human intuition around like shape and character recognition, that is intriguing. All right, so let's do this. I want to shift our focus just a little bit over to David in the space that you operate. You have always been known to be an advocate for AI and openly supporting and encouraging its responsible use by your students. So we've kind of seen this through your syllabi. One of can you share maybe your thoughts or your philosophy on the trajectory of AI in higher education in reference to teaching? Because I know there's a great deal of our librarians and archivists who also teach.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd probably caveat that by just saying I hope that I'm known for someone who feels there is a correct way to use AI, in part because I think we have to find it, because people are going to use it either way. And so we have to find ways to channel that into a positive usage. But yeah, no, I've got a story I like to tell of when I revised my syllabus for this new world we find ourselves in. It was about 36 hours before summer semester started this past summer, because Saturday night, that's when we all revise our syllabi for the next semester. And what I do when I revise my syllabi, because I teach 5 classes, but they're all online, so there's expectation that you have things ready on day one, because students log in, they don't show up for lecture on day one. But the way I revise my syllabi is I like to look back at the previous semester's forum early on and find out what questions were being asked a lot that I feel like I should have, pardon my cat, I should have answered in the syllabus, so that we could not have to go through that in form. Some of it's healthy, but a lot of it was just kind of, what am I allowed to do with AI? So I decided I wanted to add an official AI policy. And it was fascinating, because what I found was the policy that I wrote for AI collaboration was exactly the same policy I'd used for years for human collaboration, which the fact that we were at a place where I could have one policy that covered both human collaboration and AI collaboration was kind of my awe-inspiring moment. But it comes down to the fact that the function of both tends to play a similar role in this regard of, I encourage my students to chat with classmates, form study groups, preview their submissions by their classmates, say, can you give me some early feedback on this? Can you chat with me about my ideas? Can you help me debug code by like looking at what I'm doing and giving me some feedback? That level of interaction we encourage, because online learning can be isolating, and so anything they can do to break that barrier is helpful. But you stop at the point of, you don't pass your laptop to your classmate and say, hey, can you write that paragraph for me? In the same way, that's not how you should be collaborating with AI. You shouldn't be asking it to write anything for you, but rather you should learn from your collaboration with it, and then let that learning come out on what you submit. I think the challenge is very often that that's a blurrier line, or is a thinner line, I should say, with AI than it is with humans. Because with humans, it's kind of a very clear, I'm giving you my laptop, you're typing on my physical keyboard. With AI, it's, there's this window and there's this window, and I'm copying and pasting things around anyway. And, what does it mean to copy and paste from the AI instead of moving my own paragraphs around and things like that? So I give the heuristic of, don't have the AI open at the same time you have your assignment open. Have your conversation, brainstorm, get feedback on your thought process, then close it down and open your assignment, because that ensures that anything that's coming out is going through the filter of your own understanding, not directly from the AI. You're not using it to do the work for you. You're using it to teach you, and then letting what you've learned come out. And if you do it that way, it can be one of the most powerful learning tools we've ever had, because you have something that can have these immediate conversations with you, as long as you also know proper usage. So someone's already mentioned the hallucination angle. And I think a lot of that also comes down to understanding the kinds of things you can get out of AI with reliability, and the kinds of things you can't. That if you want a very specific reference to a paper that proves something, you're not going to get that out of a lot of the tools we use nowadays. I'm sure by the time some people are listening to this, since this is recording, there might be new tools that can do that a little bit better. And this is hard to talk about because everything is changing so fast. But the general kind of use case is not so much for using it to supplant a Google search or supplant a Google Scholar search, but for getting gist, for getting broader understanding, for exploring ideas. It's generally not going to hallucinate, broad, well-established facts and trends. It's going to, get some of the very fine-grained specifics wrong, but as long as you know how deep to go with it, you can get a lot out of it. What's fascinating also to me, I think you have to pay attention to how you fit the AI to the particular class, the particular learning goals, things like that. I know some universities that have tried to have one AI collaboration policy to cover the entire university, and I don't think that's the right approach, because the way you use an AI in different classes is going to differ. Even within my own classes, it differs. I have one class that's a heavily project-based class, and we tell students that about 1/3 of the way through the semester, they propose their own project to do. And the project is meant to be about 100 hours of work over the course of the rest of the semester. And they can do software development, they can do research, they can do a literature review. There's a lot of stuff they can do. And my feedback to them is, if you can do more in 100 hours with AI assistance than you could without it, then use it. As long as you document what you did, what your contribution was. It's the same thing as the calculus analogy of, you can do more problems with a calculator in calculus than you can without it, as long as you understand the role it's playing. My other classes, where we want you to demonstrate your understanding of certain algorithms or certain approaches, we say there you shouldn't, over collaborate with it. You shouldn't copy from it too much. You can learn from it, but you have to make sure to externalize your own understanding, because the goals are different. And so I think trying to have too broad a policy on how AI applies to different classes is kind of like deciding, as a K-12 school, for example. So if you're running a school that runs from K all the way through 12th grade, deciding we are either going to have calculators or not have calculators, and just leave it at that. When the reality is, elementary school, you probably don't have them. Maybe you have a little bit for arithmetic once students, need to start doing some more advanced problem solving. But then once you get to calculus, you can't imagine doing AP calculus without calculators. And so fitting the technology to the learning goals and the levels of a certain class is going to be critical with this new technology, just as it's been with every other technology that's come along over the past several thousand years. Lots of things that are being said about AI in education right now have been said about handwriting and books and calculators and smartphones. And so a lot of this, we've gone through this kind of transition before. I think right now we're having to do it faster, because it landed everywhere all at once, as opposed to some earlier technologies that took months and years to roll out.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's more of how you use the tool, and the governance or criteria around that may be unique or different across the different domains or spaces. How like in your instance, David, how has your students responded to that?
I've seen mostly a positive response. Some negative response. I've seen some students who point out, especially for my classes, that tell you not to use it directly, but learn from it, who basically say, we're going to be using this at the workplace. Why are you making us do more to do this in education than what you're preparing us to do? Which part of that gets into a very broad philosophical debate over whether higher education is job training, which I think we see ourselves as job training. And if you're here just to help you get a better job, then there's a priority mismatch. But a lot of it comes down to the functional reason of, I believe that you need to learn X and Y to be able to do something in the workplace or in life, or just to understand, there's something I want you to understand. And there is an ability to use AI to shortcut that understanding, not shortcut to that understanding, but shortcut past that understanding. And my goal in my class is different from your goal in the workplace. Your goal in the workplace is probably to generate a thing that works, whereas my goal is to prove that you understand some concept. But that's been a minority of students. Most students I've interacted with have essentially said they appreciate the formal expectations that, if you don't put up some rules about this, there's always this kind of this suspicion that, some student, actually, it was fascinating when we first had this, when we first landed in November, one of my tests was open. So my tests tend to be open for a long time at a time because of the nature, they lend themselves to that. And so it landed while the test was already open. And my tests are open book, open note, open everything. You just can't talk to another person live. And so when ChatGPT was released, students asked, are we allowed to use ChatGPT on the exam? And what was fascinating to me was that classmates all replied saying, no, of course you're not allowed to use that. And I came along and said, hey, I'm not changing policies on the exam just because a new tool came out. I never said you can't. It's not a person, no matter what your, crazy people on Facebook might think. But, I didn't prohibit it. So sure, go ahead and let's find out how well it does, or how much it helps. So we found out it actually didn't help all that much due to some, I think, specifically about my exam design. But the fascinating thing to me was that students saw it as being so powerful that they assumed using it would be considered cheating. And based on my policies, it was not. So I think the reaction I've gotten is a lot of appreciation for having very clear limits, because not only does it make them aware of what they can't do, but it empowers them to do the things they can do. It empowers them to know, as long as I'm using this in this way, as long as I'm following this heuristic, I can explore it and find out how much it can help me, as opposed to being very fearful of, if I use it, there's somehow going to know, there's going to be some watermark in my code. There's going to be something that tips off the fact that I was using this kind of tool. So I've seen a lot of appreciation from that, especially as a lot of other places I know have gone, had that initial reaction of just, no to everything new, which is a normal reaction, I think, to have early on. But I think having these formal expectations has been appreciated.
Nice. Very much appreciate that perspective and that direction, because I think you're probably shaping the future for many in how you're kind of leading in that space. Eric, I'm going to move a question to you. I know you're you're a leader in in building the 21st century of education, right? And you have a focal point on digital learning technologies. What's your take on AI and its shaping the educational landscape in the 21st century? And I know that's a big time horizon, right? So it may be more predictive, or it may be more, your thought process on what the future should hold as you see and play in this digital space.
Sure. So I can take that from two perspectives. First, at the short term, we see a lot of this in the marketing and communications part of educational services. Everyone's doing generative AI, whether it's beneficial to the product as a whole. In many ways, I think we spoke to it earlier, that it feels kind of like a hype term without so much of its intentional goals there. That's where we're seeing a lot of it embedded with the tools that we see. Some of it's incredibly valuable, like, for example, just for quality of life of the captions that exist on our streaming and virtual services there. since a lot of the generative AI platforms have come out, we've seen a marked increase in quality in automatically generated captions. And I, for one, appreciate that. It makes my life a lot easier when juggling online meetings throughout my day. When it comes to the educational landscape, a lot of these tools are still coming out. A good example being like Turnitin's AI detection. It came in many ways, went as generative AI and large language models continued to proliferate and democratize to be a much larger volume of tools that exist. And that makes that kind of activity fairly difficult in the medium to long term to accurately identify. On the longer term, sort of thinking at a much larger time scale of incorporating this more holistically into the educational experience, there's a lot of opportunity for the future of higher education and for libraries to embed generative AI and tools that assist that to personalize and customize learning for the individual. That opportunity of taking an online educational resource or even just a snippet of knowledge and catering it to the learner and their preferences, their communication standards, what they prefer, how they prefer to have something reoriented can be incredibly valuable. That's something that has always been sort of a long-standing goal of education, is to have something be customized to who the learner is. Part of my doctoral work was sort of deconstructing software development within education, because at the end of the day, we all have biases as we develop and structure our software. The way that I would program, for example, is different than every other panelist on this list would do. And that's structured through all of our background. And that personalization is super important. And I think speaks to a lot of the long-term goals here as it gets more holistically embedded within our instructional materials, whether that be, for example, our learning management systems or within our library software or services or platforms. Having that opportunity to engage with that more holistically, I think, will benefit our learners and help us on some of the procedural work and customizations that exist there.
Yeah. The future is very difficult to predict, but I think the path of where we go is shaped in the very meaning of what you're seeing. In like if you were thinking from a professor's standpoint in relation to their use of technology, what are you seeing from that lens around adoption? We've got a great example from David around like his approach and his perspective. Are you seeing that more widespread from a usage or adoption perspective, or is it a little different?
Sure. So from David's standpoint, having those policies, procedures, best practices are super important. Something that libraries, I think, have done an incredible job of getting ahead of. So, in my work, I look at the future of universities at a large scale. And, when OpenAI released ChatGPT and the world went aflame, one of the first things I did was look at higher education in general and say, what's going on here? Where are we leading in the messaging practices, policies in place there? And libraries, in most cases, were the leading voices at that university for that messaging. And I think that's incredibly important. However, for the future implementation, I feel like the biggest barrier is looking at the data that you can provide to these services and what you can do ethically and responsibly and how to do so. The reason why OpenAI caught on fire and was so popular was because all you needed was a username and password to log in. The service was free because the input and data that you were providing was helping train the future products that were releasing there. Libraries have a unique perspective in providing that playground to provide a more democratic playground of different tool sets that meet for the needs of researchers, students, instruction, and building out that sort of personalization experimentation lab, just like we've seen with maker spaces, with computer labs, with XR equipment, looking at augmented or virtual reality. All these different skill sets sort of fit within that same timeline. The only difference here is for these large language models and generative AI, it simply is code that exists somewhere in a rather large computing platform. And libraries have that opportunity to sort of steer and centralize those services to provide that outlet for their primary constituents. And I think there's a lot of value in that, because there will be faculty who embrace this very heavily and faculty that will be slow to adopt, just like we see with all technology adoption curves. That's fine. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for innovation as part of that. But situated within libraries, I think gives all y'all as attendees that unique perspective to be able to explore, experiment, and provide that, lack of a better word, playground for that research and scholarly exploration to take shape.
Thank you. Yes, I echo that thought process. That is kind of a battle cry for what libraries can actually do within this space. I'm going to switch a little bit and talk about some of the challenges, right? And Mark, I'm going to kind of pass this one to you, because you mentioned this one earlier. You know, in libraries, we care a lot about truth. We care a lot about, you know, the ability to understand the source of where some information comes from. Reference material, like the ability to validate that something is legitimate. You mentioned this thought process of hallucinations or AI confabulations. Like, what do you, if you were to make a prediction, right? Like, what do you think the solution to that is to make it more comfortable for libraries to use AI as trusted sources?
Such a tough question, right? Because, you know, as David said, we're in the middle of things, and things are changing very fast. Some of these technologies are already starting to adapt, and we see some of these large language models starting to kind of provide the source material that they're drawing from. I think, you know, I think there, one aspect of this is education, understanding what these models can and cannot do and what they should or should not be used for, right? And I think, you know, if you approach a library and say, you know, I'm doing research and here are the tools available, helping the users of the library understand how these resources are best used. So, you know, start with ChatGPT, but then follow up and you know, with various ways. So I think being a guide in terms of how these tools are used, and then also kind of keeping track of how these tools are updated and how they can be approached as they advance and move on. I think fundamentally, though, what is happening here is our ways of knowing are going to change. And we don't know if we fully understand this, you know, so a lot of our ways of knowing have been through writing. And maybe they're not going to be through writing anymore, because now writing is, you know, easy and cheap and doesn't kind of convey the same authority that it used to, when everyone can do it without, you know, any sort of sense of, you know, attachment to fact or truth. And so I think we just have to understand how our ways of understanding and ways of knowing are going to change, and kind of keeping up and you know, flexing with the times, and not saying, you know, we're going to do things the way it used to be, but let's look at these new ways and kind of find our path through here. I mean, that's not a great answer, but right,
but it's a real answer.
But it's a real answer here.
Yeah, it is not a very, it's not a linear path to where, oh, this is what the solution set is going to look like. It's going to have to be shaped. Yeah. Eric, you had your hand. You want to take a stab at that?
I just wanted to add on to that and say that, like, whether we like it or not, these tools are being holistically embedded within all the devices that are in front of us. So I'm in front of a Windows machine right now, and Microsoft is, as some might know, all in on OpenAI. They have invested significant amounts of money, and the product of that will be Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, the Windows operating system, and likely its components on mobile devices will have generative AI and large language models embedded within its services. Whether we like it or not, this will be part of the fundamental approach of how we create knowledge. And to David's point, building out your instructional strategy to work around that and work in tandem with this new technology proves to be beneficial in the long term, because it will be as ubiquitous as the Google search bar on our devices is. It answers a lot of those systemic pipe dreams we had about Alexa and Siri and voice assistants of conversations, and the retrieval and generation of knowledge through there. And having that become reality forces us to reckon with that and adjust how we build out that instruction.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. So this is, let me, we got a few minutes. So I want to go to a few of the questions that we have from our audience. Our first one comes in that talks about, my library has a makerspace. As students and other departments make 3D or 2D content, how can we protect ourselves from copyright infringement? Is this an issue for us to consider? And I think, I mean, that's an interesting question, right, around like the creation of content. Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
I can volunteer as tribute if no one else is going to.
Go for it. Go for it.
So the short answer is I don't wear a legal hat. I always go to my organization's legal department for a lot of answers on this. The short answer that I give is that, especially for like media generation, there is that gray line that is existing where you're starting to see intellectual property embedded within the generative capabilities. So a perfect example would be OpenAI's DALL-E 3, the image generation service. As you see its recent release, is starting to match a lot more of Midjourney, a competitor image generation service, and start to show a lot more intellectual property and existing copyrights within the content. The source content has that there from what they're pulling. It's clear in the output there. I don't know how to reconcile those large legal and copyright infringes there, but I don't wear the right hat to do that. But fortunately, I think most universities or organizations to which libraries are embedded have some sort of legal representation there. The only thing that I note is that the ability to generate some of these procedural pieces of content may be incredibly beneficial, especially when we think about things like augmented reality and extended reality. Being able to generate rather than scan, for example, trees, can make the generation of a virtual environment a lot easier to do rather than having to do it tree at a time, or and create some customization there.
Thank you, Eric. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, you know, libraries are embedded in the university, and the university has an educational mission. So if you're in that makerspace because you're educating yourself, because you're practicing new skills, you're trying to invent new skills, you know, this dovetails nicely with the talk came right before this about fair use, right? You're in the fair use space. I don't think you have a lot to worry about. Fine, because you're not commercializing, you're not going after, a market, things like that. Once you kind of progress from educational mode to, and lawyers, I'm probably going to get in trouble here, but once you start looking beyond the educational mission of the university, you need to be talking to IP lawyers anyways, like if you're thinking startups or things like that, and that's just kind of part of the natural progression from the educational scene out into the non-educational scene. I think libraries can also kind of be resources to help navigate those spaces, but it might just be here's when you've crossed that line. So I largely say use the library makerspaces as safe spaces, and go and explore and understand these things and see what they can and cannot do.
Yeah.
And don't sue me if I said something wrong.
Of course not, right? All right. Another question. From a panelist perspective, on AI created citations, of scholarship that doesn't actually exist. There are scholars looking for articles that don't exist, and with AI, maybe much more common than in the past and affect future scholarship. What's your perspective on that, Kartik?
Hey, yeah. So that ties in directly to hallucinations and the things that we have been talking about. It's AI is ChatGPT, like when it's not really grounded or when it's not actually asked to produce like citations from real databases, it treats citation generation as regular text generation, and it would generate text that looks like a citation, but like it just happens to look like some mixture of citations that it has seen in its training data. But at the same time, in natural language processing and large language modeling, we are seeing that the capabilities of these tools are improving depending on how you use them. For example, there's a huge push toward retrieval augmented generation, where you kind of ground the language generation through AI to a database, to a closed database. So as long as you have access to a closed database, it's still difficult right now to control text generation, to only restrict to entries in this closed database and give pointers to this closed database. But that's where I feel a lot of natural language processing research is headed toward, that in order to like stay truthful, or in order to not make up citations, can we at least restrict our text generation to only consider a closed set of databases? Because that research question in itself would alleviate some of these issues related to citation hallucination.
Indeed.
We're also in a moment of time here, right, where people don't understand these technologies, and they're thinking they can do more than they can actually do. And I don't know if people kind of develop some AI literacy and saying, this is what, it's not right here. I saw the chat comment about the interlibrary loan people having a hard time like with requests for things that don't matter. And I'm sure that's very frustrating for the staff, but also what a great opportunity to intervene and say, you know what, thank you very much for actually trying to go through the library. And now we can kind of help you understand, what's going on. And, we have in some sense prevented a mistake, so that's a really useful service, as maybe as frustrating as it might be.
Yeah. All right. So take a couple more questions, and then we're gonna do a poll for the entire group, and there'll be 3 questions in the poll. But before we get to the poll, let me throw this question out. And this is around commercialization, which has the ability to prevent like full broad scale adoption. So the question is, AI has so far generated a lot of buzz with little revenue generation to warrant the amount of investment. Is generative AI at risk of disappearing because of commercialization strategies? Thoughts?
We'll see. All right. We're in a time where people are doing a lot of exploration and trying to find those use cases that are actually going to kind of stick and land. I think even in the last months, we're even kind of seeing a shift where a lot of commercialization is shifting from the front end. So here's a cool tool that you can use to make art or music or something like that, to back end sort of stuff. So enterprise to enterprise sorts of uses. So I think there's still a lot of people trying to figure out how to commercialize and how to make to find the right use cases where this is actually going to happen. At the end of the day, I would say Google's still going to be a search company. Microsoft is still going to make Office products next year. There's going to be some new things, some new tools that users are going to have. I think they'll largely be in the creative space. And there's going to be a whole bunch of backend stuff that we don't understand, but we've never understood that stuff to begin
Eric?
I feel like we got burned by Web 3.0 so bad that in blockchain that whenever we hear about things that are computationally expensive, and over a long term very hard to maintain, it becomes a bit something that we shy away from, because in many cases those didn't pan out. One of the opportunities that I see here is for much more fine-tuned and almost more scaled inward towards what we can see for these large language models and generative AI towards specific purposes that don't require a vast voluminous tool that requires a behemoth of energy to maintain for its usage.
Yeah. David?
Yeah, I'm reminded of the .com boom back in the 2000s, where there were so many early websites that just couldn't figure out how to monetize, and there was a lot of early investment and excitement, and then it all busted. And at the time, I think there was the same kind of question of the internet. That was a cool fad in the late 90s, and now we'll get back to normal society. And I think the internet stuck around. I haven't checked lately, but I think we'll see the same kind of thing with AI. You're exactly right. The question is exactly right, that there's a lot of hype right now, a lot of questions of how you monetize any of this stuff. But and so I would not be surprised at all to see if we saw a pullback. But I don't think that's going to be a disappearing kind of thing. I think it'll be a case of there's a lot of the typical hype cycle thing of we're at kind of the peak of the hype cycle. In a weird way, though, because here the hype is actually kind of, it's more immediate. It's not hype of, you saw a tech demo of a new VR system and, now it's 5 more years until it actually comes out. We have access to it. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw something of that cycle of some figuring out how to actually integrate it, because there's so much pressure right now just to demonstrate yourself as a leader that some of these companies are giving away, their stuff essentially for free or for far less, just to kind of put their stake in the ground and affirm that they're a competitor, not to get left behind. The one thing that I think is interesting, I don't know if what I'm about to say is going to prove prescient or completely backward, but I think there's also a little bit more of a pushback societally against some of these things than I've seen on some other technologies of, you go around YouTube and various places and, there's questions about, did this person use ChatGPT as their speechwriter? Did they use that to script that apology video on YouTube or anything like that? And it's introduced so much kind of, I shouldn't say introduced, but it's added to what was some existing distrust that the internet introduced around anonymity and things like that of, it's making catfishing, so much better, because now instead of just, pretending to be a person online, you can pretend to be a person online with all, realistic looking pictures and all this stuff, creating a whole fake identity. And I'm curious the extent to which we might see that push back into a return to prioritizing real life experiences where I'm sitting with you live. I know you're a real person, and it takes away some of that. I could see 10 years from now us seeing much more emphasis on in-person experiences, because it takes away so much of that distress, which is someone who specializes in online education is slightly terrifying. But it'll be interesting to see if that it gains enough inertia, or if that's just kind of the usual blip in the road. If we saw the same thing with some other technologies around, early on, the idea of having cameras so ubiquitous was one of the things that people said have dampened the adoption of things like Google Glass. But now we're 10 years later, and we've kind of grown to accept that cameras are pretty ubiquitous now. And so I wonder to what extent those technologies would be more accepted now because we've come along. And so I don't know if this will be kind of a temporary kind of pushback, or if it will signal a more significant shift.
Yeah. So I know, to be respectful of time, I think we have about 3 minutes. I have one final question. So our apologies to everyone that we didn't get to your question in the Q&A section. Time is it's such an important topic. So I know there's a lot of interest. I would love for you all to answer this question. And Kartik, if you wouldn't mind being our first one to respond to this one. In preparing for the future, you notice that there's a lot of sci-fi books and materials that have been written around like super intelligence and robots or systems, and this all kind of underlying like AI. Even those stories shared concern about AI. I heard a quote most recently. I think the last time I heard it, actually, David, you had mentioned it in one of your talks. And this is AI won't replace humans, but humans with AI will replace humans without AI.
Which is not original at all. I said that first because it hits so often. So please don't.
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought it was cool when I heard it, because I was like, I wonder, do many experts believe that that is true? And so I wanted to get you all's take on that before we kind of departed for the next session. But also, before you answer, Kartik, I wanted everyone to also note that Anu has placed a link into the chat. And this link has 3 questions that we would love to get your thoughts on as we kind of wrap up within this last minute of the session.
Yeah, that's a really cool question. So sci-fi, I mean, like many things, it talks about AI, but sci-fi has also talked about a lot of other things. It has talked about aliens and like future of humanity. And I mean, yeah, it's sci-fi is beautiful, and AI is just one of the things that has captured human imagination, which is coming sort of into fruition today. But yeah, like in regards to like how AI is going to change society and humanity, I mean, we are already changing as people today, and I genuinely believe that it's it's like technological revolution or the internet. Like when internet came, would someone say that humanity changed? Some would say yes. Some would say maybe not, because humans are still humans. We just have internet and Google, and we can search for things, and we have information on our fingertips today, which we did not have 30 years ago or something like that. So I feel AI would be like, again, like a more I feel to be I'm optimistic, but overall I think AI would be yet another tool that will improve information sharing among humans, and that will it might have negative consequences as well, just like internet has had negative consequences in terms of spreading misinformation. So yeah, so education is important, and I feel it would be a tool that could be misused or used for our advantage, and we are already living in that reality. So yeah, I feel our society is going to change, but yeah, I guess we'll adapt.
Okay. Well, you know what? We are out of time, unfortunately. I would have loved to get everyone's response, but Kartik, I think you closed us out with a great positive trajectory to the future. All right. Thank you all for the time.